afternoon. My name is Andy Beal. I'm one of Ernst & Young's blockchain strategy leads. I live in San Francisco, and I've been following the NFT space for a while, and I'm here to talk to you today about the use of tokens in the enterprise, which is not a topic that gets touched on a lot, but something that we're really excited about. I'm going to start by referencing an article that I read last week on a flight that I thought was really interesting. Kevin Kelly, who's one of the former editors of Wired, published an article about something he called the mirror world. And the mirror world is what Kevin is calling the digital representation of our physical world. So put differently, it's like our physical world's digital twin. And the development of this mirror world has been happening for years. It was foreshadowed by things like Google Maps and Google Earth, right? Very crude, static, digital representations, a bunch of millions of photos stitched together. But it's evolved from things like Pokemon Go and Magic Leap that are mapping the physical world around you and then introducing, fun, dynamic, digital elements to it. And when driverless cars and drones hit the roads and skies at scale, they will map our physical world in enormous, incredible detail overnight, right? The more cameras we put out into the world, the faster this digital mapping happens. And eventually, as the title of this article suggests, every road, building, curb, lamppost, pothole, even consumer products and component parts will have a digital representation. And so I don't know if you can see, but the text below the image up there says we're building a one-to-one map of the world, which is a pretty interesting concept. We used to pull out road maps, that you could hold in front of you. We're building a digital one that is, one-to-one scale with our planet, which is pretty neat. So where does blockchain come into this? So if every physical thing, which by nature is scarce because it's bound by the laws of physics, has a digital representation, blockchains become the stewards of integrity for this digital map, right? They preserve scarcity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The author believes that this is blockchain's nail, right? Blockchain is described as a hammer looking for a nail, great technology looking for a killer use case. He thinks this is it. And I think it's certainly one of the biggest ones. The current vehicle for scarcity is a token. I don't know if it will always be that, but it is for now. And so if you assume that every physical thing is going to have a digital twin, and tokens are the vehicle by which we maintain scarcity in that world, then everything that can be tokenized will be tokenized. So this all depends on scarcity. That's the linchpin, right? But once you get something into tokenized form, the arguments for using that are numerous. Transferability is the obvious one, right? A lot of the talks have been about moving around digital assets from game to game, from platform to platform, et cetera. But you can do a lot more with these things. You can program their behavior, right? One of the most interesting things about crypto to me is that it's programmable money. I can also associate payments and events to these assets now. I can have them interact with other assets. I can fractionalize the interest. I can bundle them together. Once I bundle them together, I can securitize them. There's another blockchain for securitization conference happening in New York today as well. So that's a massive use case for tokenization. I can borrow against them. I can rent them. I can loan them out, and I can also expire them. So All right, so what does this have to do with enterprise applications? So what's the mirror world and tokenization have to do with big enterprise software? EY last year launched a product that we call OpsChain. And I think we released the latest version, our public version, at DevCon last fall. But OpsChain is effectively the digital twin or the mirror world of a supply chain. And so if you're not familiar with what a supply chain looks like, I'm going to run through a really simple example here. So you usually start out with raw materials, component parts. Those are assembled into a finished product. They are put onto a truck or a boat. They are taken off the boat, off the truck, put in a warehouse so they can be distributed to stores that put them on shelves, and then they're ultimately sold to the end consumer, right? So this is a very simple supply chain. So how do we create the digital twin of this? So we create raw material tokens, and once those raw material tokens are assembled into a finished product, we do the same thing with the digital counterpart. And then we track the movement of these across the participants on the network as the finished products move through the physical supply chain. And this may sound simplistic, but the interesting thing is there's a lot of data elements that happen across that continuum that are really, really important. We want to know what container those goods are in. We want to know what the temperature of the container was, particularly if we're moving something like food products or pharmaceuticals. We also want to attach things like insurance policies to these assets too, so we know who's responsible if the boat sinks or if the truck gets in an accident, right? So why are large enterprises interested in blockchain? Why do they want to create a digital twin of this process here? Because it turns out that while this is a really simplistic diagram of a supply chain, a lot of them are really complicated, and I'll put up one that you all are going to be familiar with. It's a product that all of us have used. And the reason this is powerful is because these companies oftentimes do not know where individual products are in the supply chain. They may be able to see one step back, but they can't see 2, 3, 4 steps back. And the reason is because each of these participants is using a different system, and they have problems talking with one another. So let me show you a much more complicated supply chain. So this is just a diagram of the outer shell of a 747. If you take into account all of the nuts, bolts, screws, seats, air masks, flotation devices, there's over 6 million parts, and these are sourced from dozens of countries, from likely hundreds of suppliers around the world, right? So Boeing has quite a task tracking all these things. They also need to be able to prove where each of these pieces came from, which is part of an FAA regulation, right? So it's really, really important to be able to know where something is in the supply chain. And when you give everyone in that chain access to a shared record, and they're able to interact with these components, or the digital twin of these components, there's an enormous amount of transparency and predictability that they get the benefit of. So that's been a very, very powerful use case for our large clients. I've got 45 seconds left. So I'm going to make a fun prediction here with the time I have left. I know a lot of the focus of this conference has been on gaming applications, and I'm extremely interested in that. I'm also a huge fan of Decentraland too, so I wanted to bring in a VR example. So I predict that in 15, 20 years, let's say, when we have very, very cheap hardware, very, very good mapping technology, that not only will big companies use blockchain to manage the back end of their supply chain, but there will be a visual overlay. They will be managing their supply chain interfacing with the digital twin, right? So they're putting on goggles, looking at the physical or the digital representation of the ship rather, right? But they'll be able to open up that shipping container and take inventory of what's in there, perhaps move things around, et cetera. So I'm really excited about this future. EY is really excited about this future. And I'll be around this afternoon if anybody has any questions. Thank you very much.